Okay, Alexander, let's talk once again about Russia. Russia. They just do not give up, do they?
No.
They do not give up
No.
on this Russia obsession. So here is the latest hoax now being sprung upon us. I will read you four headlines from the mainstream media and one headline from RT. And this is from the Wall Street Journal. Russian spy unit paid Taliban to attack Americans. U.S. intelligence says bounties paid by GRU are disclosed as U.S. plans troop drawdown. Taliban peace plan. That's from the Wall Street Journal. From the most trusted source in news, CNN. Anyway, I can't say without laughing. Russian intelligence officers offered cash rewards to Taliban fighters to kill U.S., UK troops in Afghanistan. Source says Russian intelligence officers for the military intelligence GRU recently offered money to Taliban militants in Afghanistan as rewards if they killed U.S. or UK troops there. A European intelligence official told CNN. So UK troops as well via a European intelligence official. From the New York Times, which originally broke this story, Russia secretly offered Afghan militants bounties to kill U.S. troops, intelligence says. The Trump administration has been deliberating for months about what to do about a stunning intelligence assessment. And let me just adjust what I said. I said the New York Times broke this story. I think I should probably say the New York Times made up this story. So let's go to The Guardian, our favorite source in the UK, The Guardian. Outrage mounts over report Russia offered bounties to Afghanistan militants for killing U.S. soldiers. Fierce response from top Democrats after U.S. intelligence finding was reportedly briefed to Trump in March, but the White House has yet to act. And from RT to get the other side of this narrative, fake story on Russians paying Afghans bounty to kill Americans. Latest example of appalling U.S., UK media coverage of Russia. Once again, Alexander, we got Russia. Once again, we have U.S. intelligence sources. Once again, we have UK intelligence sources, anonymous sources at that. Where have we seen this before?
Well, we've been seeing this for the last 4 years, ever since Donald Trump emerged on the political scene. And this is what it's all about. It's ultimately not about Russia at all. It's about Donald Trump, and the Russians are being dragged in again. Let's just, and one does almost hesitate, to discuss the story itself. But let's just talk.
I just can't take it anymore.
I know. Let's just ask a few simple, and I would have thought
the world is burning. The world is burning, and they're stuck on this.
I know. Let's just ask a few simple and obvious questions, which I think blow the story apart immediately. Why would the Russians pay the Taliban to kill American soldiers when the Taliban have been spending the last 20 years killing American soldiers? I mean, it's hardly, I mean, the Taliban doesn't need to be encouraged by the Russians to kill American soldiers. They don't need bonuses from the Russians to kill American soldiers. They have already been doing it. They've been doing it enthusiastically whenever they can, at every opportunity, for the past 19 years, ever since the United States intervened in Afghanistan in the aftermath of 9/11. So, I mean, already that seems to me, completely shaky premise. I mean, why would the Russians want to spend their money to get the Taliban to do what the Taliban are already doing? I mean, it doesn't make any kind of sense. Now, that's one thing. Secondly, the source of this story, and if it wasn't completely made up, which by the way it may have been, I mean, it's quite likely it probably was completely made up, but it's attributed to interrogations of Taliban prisoners of war and Afghan criminals by the Afghan security forces people who we know always follow, careful procedures, who never make up stories themselves, who are, entirely unimpeachable. So, I mean, already that's the second element to all of this. But the third thing is, and this is where I find it really gets really bizarre, is that these stories are being repeated as we speak. I mean, the British media is still full of, publicising the stories, full of it. And the British angle about how British soldiers were targeted. But one of the central elements, about the central element of the original New York Times story, was that Trump had been briefed about all of this in March and had done nothing. Well, Donald Trump denies he was breached. Vice President Pence, who supposedly was also briefed, denies he was breached. And Radcliffe, who is the Director of National Intelligence and who should know, has come out and said that Trump and Pence were never briefed. So we know that part of the story is false. Given that that is one of the key parts of this story, why assume that any other part of it is true? The whole thing looks, frankly, fabricated, like so many other things have been. But, we're back to make believe anonymous sources. I wonder whether that European intelligence officer was, perhaps his name was Christopher Steele. That's only a joke. That's a joke. But, I mean,
why is that a joke?
It might even be true over all that. But I mean, we're back to the world of make believe and fantasy and spinning absurd stories about connections between Donald Trump and Russia, because that's what this is all about. It's all about the election. It's all about smearing Donald Trump, making out that he's soft on Russia, that Putin is this evil, Blofeld, controlling Russia and the Kremlin, who has Donald Trump in his pocket. I mean, it's all about that old discredited story. We had the Mueller investigation, which went on for all those years, found that the whole thing was completely not true, that there was no legal collusion of any kind. We've seen the FBI, IG Horowitz coming forward, explaining why the Steele dossier was a load of nonsense. We've now had all this information coming out from Congress about how all those people who are involved in Russiagate, people like Susan Rice and all the rest, and the chief executive officer of CrowdStrike have come along and admitted that there's no actual evidence of any collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians. And yet here we are again, once more, Donald Trump in the pocket of Vladimir Putin, sits back and lets the Russians bribe the Afghans, the Taliban, to kill Americans. It's just leaves you speechless. How often does this have to be disproved before it is finally accepted as untrue? How often do we have to, see how these so-called anonymous sources are compulsive liars, because that's what they are, before we accept, if they even exist, by the way, which sometimes I do wonder about, before we stop giving any credence to them. Never, it seems, at least not while Donald Trump is a political force in the United States and in American politics.
All right, what would Russia have to gain by inserting itself in Afghanistan? Do we have any sort of indication as to the amount of money that was being paid per soldier that the Taliban killed? I mean, what's the motivation on the Taliban's side of things? What's the motivation on Russia's side of things? Have they commented on these accusations as well? The whole thing doesn't make even the remote type, doesn't make any type of sense. I'm at a loss. The whole thing's so dumb. The whole thing is just so dumb.
I mean, it's so dumb that it just leaves you speechless. The answer is, we don't know how much the Russians are supposed to pay the Taliban, because of course the Russians didn't pay any money to the Taliban. I mean, if you start getting into precise figures, by the way, it becomes easier to disprove a story. So of course the anonymous source doesn't come up with figures.
That's my point. That's my point. If you're a journalist, if you're the paper of record, like the New York Times, shouldn't you do some legwork at least and
Well, I know.
get to some hard facts and numbers?
I understand that the journalist who covered this story, I may be wrong about this, but I understand that the journalist, at least one of them who covered this story for the New York Times, has got a Pulitzer Prize. So yes, you would expect a journalist like that to ask those kind of questions. But you're not going to find those in the pages of the New York Times, because those kind of obvious and simple questions, how much money, are not asked. Nor
Rubles, dollars, are they giving them
whatever? Quite, yeah. Well,
sheep or camels, or I mean, property? What?
Quite so.
Is it getting wired to the Caymans? Is it going to a Swiss bank account? I mean, honestly, is it cash?
Quite exactly. Gold. I mean, you ask. I mean, can I just point out, by the way, that the one thing that isn't Afghanistan isn't short of at the moment is money. I mean, the place is absolutely swamped with it. The United States has thrown trillions into Afghanistan. And of course, Afghanistan is also the center of the world's international heroin trade, in which the Taliban is known to be involved. So the Taliban isn't going to need a few $1,000, rubles, or whatever from the Russians. Right. I mean, it's financial resources from the drugs trade. It must dwarf those. I mean,
heroin, or killing soldiers. Heroin.
Quite so. I mean, motivation. You asked about motivation. Well, absolutely none on either side. I mean, as I said, the Taliban doesn't need this money, and the Russians. The very last thing the Russians want is to get mixed up in Afghanistan again. I mean, they were there in the 1980s, and they came out, frankly, with a bloody nose. They don't want to go back in again at all. They don't want to get mixed up with the Taliban. The Taliban is a militant jihadist Islamist movement. The Russians do not like militant jihadist Islamist movements. They fought them in the Caucasus. They're fighting them in Syria. They're fighting them, or some of their mercenaries are supposed to be fighting them in Libya. The very last thing they want to do is to get mixed up with the Taliban and mixed up in Afghanistan again. So to answer your question, there is no conceivable motivation to become involved on either side. And you asked me what either of them have said. Both the Russians and the Taliban, by the way, has a sophisticated media operation, have categorically denied the story. I think it's probably a true denial. So we have Donald Trump, who says he wasn't briefed. We have Vice President Pence, who says he wasn't briefed. We have Radcliffe, the Director of National Intelligence, say that Trump and Pence weren't briefed. And for what it's worth, the Russians and the Afghans say, and the Taliban say, no truth to this story. So everybody involved, everybody named in it is denying any part in it. And you could take some of those denials from the Russians and the Afghans, if you like. You might not want to believe them, but ask yourself this question: does it make sense? Of course it doesn't. It doesn't make any kind of sense. It doesn't make any kind of sense as a story, but it does make sense if you are intent on destroying Donald Trump and defeating his bid to get re-elected, and you want to resurrect this whole Russia nonsense all over again, which is what this story has done.
All right. I mean, they make the US and the UK look so bad, these mainstream media clowns. And do you have any final thoughts? I mean, it's just so dumb.
Well, I think actually, I mean, I do think in this instance, I mean, this is so nonsensical and so easily refuted and so quickly refuted. I wonder how much traction this thing will gain. But
that's what we said. That's what we said about a 10-minute phone call between Trump and Zelensky. So.
I know. So maybe we're going to see an impeachment brought over this one. I mean, I don't know. I mean, whatever it is. I mean, the point I was going to make is, even if this is refuted, there will be something else, because clearly now there is an industrial process whereby you produce these Russia stories which are damaging to Donald Trump, and the moment it looks as if one of them is collapsing, you start with another, and you keep this whole theme of Russia, as you said, Russia. You keep it alive for as long as you can, and perhaps for as long as you need to. And I'm going to say something else. It's long overdue that Republicans, and I'm not just talking about Republicans in Congress, I'm talking about Republicans like John Solomon and Sarah Carter, understood themselves that these Russia stories have no basis in reality. The Russians are not involved. They did not concoct Steele's dossier. They did not set up Russiagate for any kind of reason. The Russians are just not a part of this. The Democrats are. The deep state in the United States is. The media is. The deep state in Britain is. The British media are. The Russians themselves are just a cipher. They're a fiction. They're just part of a spy story which has no substance.